mobility, breathing, central nervous system correlation to how the body works for an individual, not just people being screened. And we're going to do a bunch of sit-ups.
I understand what you're saying, but didn't a lot of those studies show that it doesn't correlate? I mean,
They're isolated.
I don't understand.
Well, they're looking at a measure of something and correlating it with other measures. Now, if they wanted to look at what are all of the variables that contribute to a pro-agility, they'd still be testing that today if they started it 5 years ago. So that's research.
I'm really serious about this question, and I really want to know, because the one thing when this comes up, okay, so I understand that core stability doesn't affect performance, but a majority of our clients are performing at this level. So when we're looking at core stability and this, I'm going to say like, okay, well that's not relevant to my client because core stability has so many other implications. And then my question, the real question is like what? So what? I gotcha, but like what? I'm asking a real question.
I think it still continues to point out that we just don't have an answer.
Right.
That all of this doesn't really have a clear definition.
If you don't have an answer, then why you come in with all these measures to train something you can't even have a slight understanding? So, for example, with Angela's question, one of the things I say, we always talk about, okay, in order for stability, we always think there's a measure of strength that we have to have. One of the studies I ran into is that if you look at, say, maximum volitional contraction, and I'm not specific, I'll have the paper if you want the references, but they looked at injured people and non-injured people in terms of maximum voluntary contraction of abs. If a lot of individuals assume that the more core stability strength you have, or the more core strength you have, that means you're going to be using more of your abs. But one of the research that I found was that in healthy adults, only 2% of the maximum voluntary contraction you use to actually just stand up or sit up. Injured people only go as high as 4%, which means that there's some co-contraction going on to stabilize an unstabilized area, but maybe due to pain or something. So now that begs the question then, how much core strength do you need? And all this stuff that we're doing to increase it, oh great, we did 20 pounds today on the TRX RIP trainer or whatever new diagonal stuff that's becoming the latest craze, and so what? I went from 20 to 30, but then I believe that goes to what is that extra strength going to do for us? Or what's the...
Again, let's go back to one of the original definitions in terms of what the core is. So as you saw in the beginning, it was migrating from the muscles around the lumbar spine all the way into the shoulders. So today's definition has a lot to do with what people are calling transfer of power. We can transfer power from the lower extremity to the upper extremity, and we need a strong core in order to be able to do that. So the measures that we've been looking at, the static measures from McGill and the Sarmon test, and some of these other ballistic measures, those are really measures to see how effectively this part of our body can transfer power to the extremities, which is the definition that we've been given. And what we're seeing, at least in these data, and by the way, this is not everything. Please don't think that I've presented you with all of the data that are out there, because I'm not. I've actually been a bit selective, but not too selective, because most of the data that we found show the same thing. It's really very consistent. What we've learned from this, at least in the way that we're able to measure core function, is that it doesn't help you transfer power. Because if it did help you transfer power, all of these ballistic throws would correlate with improved performance or improved scores in those measures. And they don't. So we can come to one of two conclusions. There is no transfer of power through the core, or we're still not measuring that correctly. And that may be the real answer, is we don't have an effective measure, which, by the way, is what we're trying to do in our lab. We are racking our brains to figure out how to measure core function, because right now, none of them work.
I just feel personally, I'll just throw this out there, core stability or the is not to perform at all. It's just to stabilize the spine, like you said earlier, and protect it so that everything else can do what it's supposed to do during the performance.
That may be true. I'm
That's
not,
how I look at it. Like, I'm
yeah.
not saying you're wrong or anything.
No, I understand that.
Like,
By the way, you can say, this is an open forum. I mean, I don't take it personally because I don't know you. So once we get to know each other, we can then take it personally. Yeah, but no, honestly though, you may be right, but that would suggest that a better score here would lead to a better score in something else, and we're just not seeing it in the data that are there. I'm not saying the data don't exist. I'm just saying that we don't see it in the available data. So we don't know what we're measuring.
I'd be interested if I did a study too on the difference of movement, so as if you were transferring from a sport, or I'm a dancer, so I always think of it in a way of the core stability. When I'm moving, my core, if it's too loose, I can't balance. If I'm flipping, there's a certain strength of stabilizing that helps you be able to do the movement you do. And so where that strength comes into movement, then I'm not like throwing.
Right, it's a different kind of movement. And that's where the counter movement jumps and those type of jumping activities and measures may have a closer relationship to what you're looking at, although I think leaping activities would probably be more closely associated with that. You know, years ago, I was playing with some of the trainers at Equinox, and we did this little test. Well, we didn't do the hop and stop exactly, but what we did was I asked the trainers to do a leap and stick their landing. So it was part of the hop and stop test. So you had to leap and then stick it. And at first, I asked all the trainers to really tighten up the core, to really stabilize it and make sure it didn't move. And we had them leap as far as they can and try to stick. Do you remember this, Ted? And what happened when they landed? They were stuttering across the floor. And then I said, okay, now everybody relax. Just completely relax all those muscles in your core. Don't think about what they're doing. Just let them go and do the same thing. And lo and behold, everybody stuck it. Because what they were doing was only using the muscles that were necessary to control that movement, and all of the other musculature was not involved. So that the system could figure out how to effectively and efficiently decelerate on landing. And that's what I'm getting at. It's not about how do we make this as tight as we can. It's about how do we teach people how to move.
I think that's exactly what I was going to say. It's more about education than it is about a stabilization or let's make this muscle stronger so it can perform better. Like neurally, let's re-educate this musculature, this group of musculature so that it actually contracts necessarily for the action to perform. There was no quadrupedal movement there at all. There was no inverted movement tested at all. So in terms of what the actual movement is in relationship to gravity, the muscle will act necessarily for that movement. So I feel like it's really more of a process of education than this, like, you know, I pick things up, I put them down. Like, and I think it has to be bigger than that because we are actually four-dimensional beings who move in all directions of movement. We navigate gravity very differently. We also have different backgrounds. Like, you were talking about, Jen was talking about Little League. Like, I didn't play Little League at all. I don't know how to swing a bat. I mean, but I do a lot of other things that are movement-oriented, that are sophisticated in a very different way, but just as sophisticated as being able to do any other, you know, very specific activity. Like when he tested the runners, their core wasn't fully developed. What does that even mean? What does it mean to have a fully developed core? For running, maybe their core was fully developed for some other gymnastic activity before standing on their head for 15 minutes.
Well, that was an astonishing quote when I saw that because, I mean, what do you have to do to be an Olympic athlete? How strong does your core have to be for you to get into the Olympics? I mean,
That's the thing. He said that about runners, but like, what about
the runners.
What about the decathletes? Like there's you know so many different.
His focus was on runners. But so at least let's limit the statement to that. Olympic runners don't need a strong core. we could just limit it to that, right?
In what measure? Are you measuring the static? Are you measuring the dynamic?
Oh, and that's really what it comes back to. Yeah, well, he doesn't, that was a review article, so he wasn't actually measuring anything. It was just a statement that he made, which I found to be absolutely remarkable. You know, Olympic athletes don't have strong enough cores to do, they're in the Olympics for crying out loud. How strong does it have to be? I mean, you're talking about the elite of the elite of the elite.
That's it. That's the difference between the elite and the non-elite. They're more calm, first of all, because they know how to do what they're doing, and it's a soft core movement for them. Their brain's already locked in. Strength of your core has nothing to do with what's already happening. So, like, we keep talking about the strength of the core, and it has to do with timing.
So there's a learning effect to that.
There's no learning. It's just
It's a reactivity.
it's a reactivity, and it's how their brain is already geared.
Actually, there is a learning effect to that.
So you're saying if you get better at rotary stability, if you just keep doing it over and over, that's going to make you have better rotary stability?
Yeah,
No, that's just going to make you better at rotary stability testing.
that's right. But actually, but what happens with those tests,
Not on the right, not if you do like this, there's no way. You're just going to keep falling over until you fix that core stability issue. I'm not talking about having the strongest core and just doing that for an hour. I'm saying you find out the asymmetrical imbalance and correct it.
well, actually, there was a study done at Coventry University that looked at all of those measures, and all they did was give the subjects practice on those tests. And every single subject improved their scores only with practice and nothing else in those measures. So that doesn't mean you're improving anything other than your ability to perform that particular function.
But if you, go ahead.
Does that stick over time? Do they come back and look at it later? How much time do they have?
Now, well, they gave them different amounts of time. So it was over a 2-week span, and they gave one group 2 practice sessions, once each week. One group had a practice session every other day, so that was 7 practice sessions over the 2 weeks. And one group, the subjects had practice every day.
So you're saying they trained the movement patterns just to be better?
Right, and they had separate people rating them so that they had different raters looking at them. Okay, so what happened was the group that practiced every day for 2 weeks improved 49% between the first rating and the 2 weeks later. The group that practiced every other day, 7 practice sessions over 2 weeks, improved 25%. And the group that had 2 practice sessions only improved 10%. So what they're saying is that with those particular tests, all you need to do is practice, huh?
They're not tests. It's a screen.
A screen, whatever you want to call them. When you have people rating those folks, and they rate them and give them a score, if all you do is allow them to practice those screens, they get better. Which is not necessarily an indication of stability or mobility or just learning how to do the test.
Right, but the thing is that's an algorithm to take and then use as a program design. It's not there to cure cancer or like fix core stability. It's there to go with that information and try and clean it up. So really it's just there to eliminate the asymmetrical imbalances.
So how do you measure an asymmetry? So let's say, what would you think would be a clinically significant asymmetry? Let's say side to side. You're measuring somebody's left leg, you're measuring their right leg. At what point does someone reach a level of asymmetry on a percentage basis from side to side that you would consider to be significant?
Okay, so they made it so that there's only 3, 4.
No, I understand that, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just asking you the question, at what point does an asymmetry become significant? I test my right leg for strength. I test my left leg for strength. At what point, what percentage difference between my right and left becomes clinically significant?
You're measuring strength, you're not measuring stability.
I'm just asking you a question.
I mean, the point is not not to go, you're going deep